Last night at dinner, something happened. Something I never imagined. My own daughter-in-law, Olivia, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Stop telling fairy tales to Sophie. She doesn't need those old-fashioned stories. She needs to grow up modern, not stuck in the past." Her words cut me like a sharp knife. For a moment, the whole dining room went quiet. I sat there holding my fork frozen in midair. I thought about Sophie, her little face, her smile when I tuck her in and tell her bedtime stories. Stories my mama told me when I was a girl growing up in Texas on a farm 20 miles outside Houston. Back then, life was tough. We didn't have much. But those stories, they gave me hope, they gave me warmth. And now my own daughter-in-law wants to take them away from my granddaughter. I looked at Michael, my only son. He lowered his eyes, didn't say a word. My heart sank like a stone in water, because silence can be louder than shouting. I whispered, "All I want is to give her the same comfort I once gave you." But Olivia didn't soften. She folded her arms and said, "You're old school, Susan. You don't understand what kids need today." The pain hit me deep because in that moment, I wasn't just a grandmother. I felt like a stranger in my own family. I held back tears. Sophie was still sitting there, her tiny hands resting on her plate, her big brown eyes looking at me. She didn't understand all the grown-up tension, but she understood one thing. Her bedtime stories might be gone forever. I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me. 69 years of life, and I never thought love could be rejected like this. If you've ever felt pushed aside, even when all you wanted was to give love, stay with me because this story is far from over. My name is Susan. I'm 69 years old. I was born in Texas, and I never left this state. Texas is wide. You can drive 6 hours straight and still not cross the border. I grew up on a farm 30 miles outside Houston. Back then, we measured life in acres of land and gallons of milk. We didn't have much money, but we had family. We had church on Sundays, and we had stories. Stories were our treasure, passed down from one generation to the next. I married young. My husband's name was Robert. He was tall, 6'2", and strong as an oak tree. We built a little house, 1,000 square feet, just enough for us and the child we dreamed of. That child was Michael. I raised him with every ounce of love I had. When Robert passed away, Michael was only 12. I had to be both mother and father. I worked double shifts at the diner on Main Street, pouring coffee and carrying plates. I remember coming home with my feet aching, my back sore. But no matter how tired I was, I would sit by Michael's bed and tell him a story. Sometimes from a book, sometimes from memory, and sometimes from my own heart. Those stories shaped him. They gave him courage. They taught him kindness. Michael grew up, went to college in Dallas, and built his life. He met Olivia, smart, ambitious, with a voice that always carried across the room. At first, I was glad she brought energy into Michael's quiet world. But over the years, I felt the distance growing wider between me and them. Still, when Sophie was born, my heart lit up again. 7 pounds, 19 inches long, a tiny miracle in my arms. I whispered fairy tales into her ears even before she could talk. Now she's 6, bright eyes, curly hair, running around the yard in Houston. And every night she asks me, "Grandma, will you tell me a story?" Those moments, they mean the world to me. Because I don't just see Sophie, I see Michael as a boy, eyes wide open, listening to the same words. But now Olivia thinks those stories are nothing but dust. She says Sophie needs coding lessons and science camps. I don't argue with progress. I know the world has changed. But I believe a child needs both knowledge and kindness. And kindness often comes from stories. Stories of good and evil, of mercy and justice, of courage and hope. That's why my heart breaks when Olivia says, "No more fairy tales." Because to me, they're not just tales. They're family history, their survival, their love wrapped in words. And without them, Sophie may grow up smart but cold. I can't bear to watch that happen. So yes, my name is Susan, 69 years old from Texas. A widow, a mother, a grandmother, and maybe the last storyteller in my family. When I look at Michael now, a grown man, a father himself, I can't help but remember the boy he used to be. Back when Robert died, Michael was 12. I still remember that morning, the sheriff drove 30 miles to deliver the news. Car accident on Highway 59, one truck, one wrong turn, and just like that, my husband was gone. I stood there on the porch barefoot, the Texas sun blazing down. Michael was in the living room, playing with his baseball glove, waiting for his daddy to come home. But his daddy never did. That night, I tucked him into bed and he whispered, "Mom, who's going to teach me how to be a man?" My heart cracked like dry wood in a fire. I told him, "You'll still learn, son, because I'll be here every step of the way." From that day on, I carried the weight of two parents. I worked double shifts at the diner on Main Street, 16 hours on my feet, carrying trays, pouring coffee, counting tips in dollar bills. Sometimes it was $30, sometimes $50, but it was always enough to keep food on the table. I remember walking home 2 miles in the dark shoes, worn thin back, aching, but never complaining, because when I opened that door, Michael was there waiting. And every night, no matter how tired I was, I'd sit beside his bed and tell him a story. Sometimes about brave knights, sometimes about a poor boy who found treasure, and sometimes about a single mom who never gave up. Michael listened, his eyes wide like he was drinking in every word. I sacrificed everything so he could grow. I sold my wedding ring to pay for his baseball camp that summer. I pawned Robert's old guitar so Michael could get a new suit for prom. I skipped doctor visits because the money was needed for textbooks. There were nights I ate nothing but peanut butter sandwiches so Michael could have a hot lunch at school. People used to ask me, "Why do you work so hard?" And I always said, because one day he'll look back and know his mama never stopped fighting for him. Years passed, Michael graduated high school, top 10 in his class. I sat in the bleachers, the Texas sun burning my skin, and when they called his name, I cried so hard I could barely clap. That was the moment every sleepless night, every sore muscle, every empty wallet felt worth it. Because my boy had made it. Later, he got into college in Dallas, first in our family to go that far. I packed his bags, folded every shirt, counted every dollar in his wallet. And before he left, I told him, "Michael, wherever life takes, you don't forget the stories that raised you." He hugged me and said, "I won't, Mom." I believed him with all my heart. Because those stories were more than bedtime tales. They were the glue that held us together through grief, through hunger, through years of scraping by. And now when Olivia says they don't matter, it feels like she's not just silencing me, she's silencing every sacrifice, every night of struggle, every piece of history that made Michael who he is today. It started small little comments here and there. Olivia would sigh when she walked past Sophie's room and heard me telling a story. She'd mutter under her breath old-fashioned nonsense. At first, I ignored it. I thought maybe she was just tired or stressed from work, but it didn't stop. It grew louder, sharper. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, the Texas air heavy with heat. Sophie curled up in my lap, listening to Cinderella, her little hands clapping at the happy ending. And then Olivia stepped outside. "Mom, we need to talk." Her voice was calm, but her eyes cold as steel. She said, "I don't want Sophie hearing these old fairy tales anymore. They give her unrealistic ideas, they make her weak." I felt my chest tighten. I answered softly, "Stories don't make children weak. They give them courage. They teach them kindness." But Olivia shook her head. "No, Mom, you don't understand. The world is different now. She needs to focus on science, on math, on coding camps. She doesn't need princes and castles." Her words hung in the humid night air like a storm waiting to break. I looked down at Sophie, her big brown eyes wide, confused. I whispered, "Sweetheart, go inside for a minute." She obeyed, her tiny feet pattering across the wooden floor. Now it was just me and Olivia. Face to face, two mothers with two very different beliefs. I tried again when Michael was a boy. Stories helped him grow strong. They gave him hope when his father died. They carried us through nights of hunger and fear. But Olivia crossed her arms. "Michael turned out fine because of you, sure, but times have changed. You're stuck in the past, Susan." That word stuck. It hit me harder than I expected. Like all my years of sacrifice were suddenly nothing but dust in the wind. I glanced at Michael. He was sitting in the living room just a few feet away. He heard everything but said nothing. His silence was like a knife twisting in my chest, because I needed him to stand up to say Mom is right. But he didn't. He stared at the floor, hands clenched together like he wanted to speak but couldn't. The argument ended with Olivia walking off, shaking her head, and me standing on the porch feeling smaller than I had in years. That night, I lay awake in bed, the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. I kept hearing her words over and over. Outdated, weak, stuck in the past. I held my pillow tight, tears slipping down my face. Because all I ever wanted was to pass down love through stories. But now even love was being questioned. And I couldn't understand why. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening. We had just finished dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread warm from the oven. Sophie asked Grandma, "Can you tell me a story before bed?" Her voice sweet, her eyes hopeful. I smiled, of course I would. But Olivia set her fork down loud enough to echo across the table. "No, Susan, no more stories." Her tone sharp, final. Sophie froze her little fork halfway to her mouth. I felt my blood rush hot in my veins. Something inside me snapped. I had stayed quiet too long, swallowed too many words. Not tonight. I took a deep breath and said, "Olivia, that's enough." Her eyes widened, surprised because I had never spoken back before. I continued, "These stories are part of who I am. They're part of Michael's childhood, and they're part of Sophie's childhood too." Olivia shook her head. "You don't get it, Susan. You're making her weak." I leaned forward, my voice firm but calm. "No, you're wrong. Fairy tales don't make children weak. They give them strength. They teach them right from wrong." I looked at Sophie, her eyes already wet, confused, scared to see adults arguing. So I softened my voice. "When I tell you stories, sweetheart, I'm not teaching you to wait for a prince. I'm teaching you to be brave, to be kind, to believe in hope." Olivia crossed her arms, her jaw tight. Michael sat there silent again. And that silence hurt more than any words. I turned to him. "Michael, say something." His eyes flickered between me and Olivia. I don't want to argue," he said quietly. But his quiet was another wound. I felt tears burn behind my eyes. I said, "Do you remember, Michael, when you were 12 and your father died? Do you remember how you cried into my lap, asking who would teach you to be a man?" His face turned pale. I pressed on. "Do you remember what got us through those nights? It wasn't textbooks. It wasn't coding lessons. It was stories. Stories gave you courage when the world felt dark. Stories carried you when I had nothing else to give." The room went quiet. Even Olivia didn't speak. Michael lowered his head, hands shaking slightly. But Olivia finally broke the silence. "That was then, Susan. This is now." Her words stung, but I didn't back down. I straightened my shoulders, my voice steady. If stories were strong enough to save a broken boy, then they're strong enough to guide a little girl. Olivia stared at me, her lips pressed tight like she wanted to argue, but had no words. Sophie slipped off her chair, ran to me, and wrapped her tiny arms around my waist. "Grandma, I want a story," she whispered. And in that moment, no argument, no silence, no cold stare. Could erase the truth? That love wrapped in words spoken from the heart still mattered. Thanksgiving came. The house smelled of turkey pumpkin pie cooling on the counter. Relatives filled the living room, laughter mixed with football on TV, the Cowboys game playing loud. I tried to keep the peace, to smile, to be gracious. But Sophie tugged at my sleeve, her voice soft. "Grandma, tell me a story tonight." My heart warmed. Of course I would. Later, after dinner, the plates stacked high, the table cluttered with dishes. Sophie climbed into my lap in front of everyone. "Please, Grandma, tell me about Cinderella." The room went quiet. Forks stopped clinking, eyes turned toward me. I hesitated. I knew Olivia was watching, but Sophie's eyes so full of trust. I began softly. "Once upon a time." Sophie leaned closer, her smile bright. And then Olivia's voice cut through the air. "Enough, Susan." The room froze. Every cousin, every aunt and uncle turned their heads. Olivia stood, her chair scraping the wood floor, her hands gripping the table edge. "You will not fill my daughter's head with outdated nonsense." Her voice sharp, echoing across the dining room. I felt my cheeks burn, heat rushing up my neck. "Olivia," I tried, but she didn't let me finish. "She needs facts, not fairy tales. She needs to grow strong, not weak." Gasps rippled around the table. Sophie's little face crumpled in confusion. I held her close, shielding her from the tension. "Please," I whispered, "she loves these stories." But Olivia slammed her hand down on the table. "Stories don't feed her future. They hold her back." My heart cracked right there in front of everyone. I looked at Michael, desperate, begging silently for him to say something. He opened his mouth, then closed it, eyes on his plate. The silence from him louder than Olivia's shouting. I stood slowly, my legs shaking, but my voice steady. "Do not call love outdated," I said firmly. "These stories carried me and Michael through nights of hunger, through grief, through loss. They are not weakness, they are survival." The room was still. You could hear the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Olivia's eyes narrowed, her voice colder than ice in a glass. "You're trying to live through my child. You can't control her like you controlled Michael." The words hit me like a slap. Control. No, I had given everything, so my son could grow. I swallowed hard, the sting in my chest unbearable. "I never controlled him," I said softly. "I saved him." Gasps again around the table. Michael finally looked up, his face pale, his lips trembling. But he said nothing, not a word. The silence stretched so heavy it pressed against my ribs. Sophie's arms clung tight around my neck, her small voice whispering, "Grandma, don't cry." Tears blurred my vision, but I held her close. Because in that moment, the world could fall apart, but I still had her love. And no one, not even Olivia, could take that away. Mini CTA, end of part 6. If you've ever been humiliated in front of family for simply loving, stay with me because the truth is about to surface. And if you want to know how this story turns, subscribe now so you won't miss what comes next. The room was heavy, silent after Olivia's outburst. I stood there holding Sophie in my arms, my heart pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear it. And then a voice broke the silence. It was Aunt Carol, Michael's father's sister, 72 years old, hair silver like mine. She had driven 2 hours from San Antonio just to join Thanksgiving dinner. She leaned forward, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Olivia," she said, "you're wrong." Gasps again around the table. Olivia turned her eyes wide, surprised anyone would dare contradict her. Aunt Carol continued, "I've been a teacher for 35 years. I taught 3rd grade right here in Texas. And let me tell you something. The kids who grew up hearing stories at night, they were different. They were kinder, they had more imagination, they knew how to dream." Olivia scoffed, "Dreams don't pay the bills." But Aunt Carol didn't flinch. "No, they don't, but they build character. They teach children that life isn't just numbers and test scores." She pointed gently at Sophie. Do you see that little girl? She'll learn math, she'll learn science. But what Susan gives her, that's something no textbook can. She gives her heart, she gives her roots. The room grew quiet again, even Olivia hesitated. I felt tears prick my eyes, hearing someone else speak the words I had been too tired to repeat. Uncle Jim Carroll's husband cleared his throat. He said, when I was a boy, my mama told me stories every night. And you know what I grew up to serve 20 years in the U.S. Army. I wasn't weak, I wasn't soft. Those stories taught me honor, courage, and respect. He looked Olivia in the eye. You think stories make kids fragile? Well, they made me a soldier. A hush fell over the table. No one moved, no one spoke. Olivia's face flushed red, but she had no reply. Michael shifted in his chair, his lips parted like he wanted to say something, but the words stuck. And then another voice chimed in. It was Sophie herself. "Mommy," she whispered, "I love Grandma's stories." Her tiny voice like a spark in the middle of a storm. She makes me feel safe. She makes me feel happy. Tears welled up in her eyes as she buried her face into my shoulder. Olivia froze, her expression softened for just a second. But then she turned away, arms crossed, eyes glistening. Aunt Carol sighed and placed her hand on mine. "Don't stop, Susan," she whispered. "You keep telling those stories." And in that moment, for the first time, I didn't feel alone. Someone else saw the truth and spoke it out loud. The dining room was still heavy with silence. Aunt Carol's words, still echoing Sophie's little whisper, still hanging in the air. Olivia sat rigid, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. But I could see it, her eyes glistened like she was holding something back. Finally, she pushed her chair away, the legs scraping the wood floor. "Fine," she said, "you all want to know why I hate those stories." Her voice cracked for the first time. The room shifted, everyone listening, holding their breath. She continued, "When I was a little girl, there were no fairy tales in my house." Her tone sharp, but beneath it something broken. My mom worked nights at the hospital, my dad left when I was 6. No one tucked me in, no one told me bedtime stories. She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking to Sophie. I grew up on my own homework at the kitchen table, TV buzzing in the background. The only stories I heard were about bills past due and arguments about money. Her hands trembled slightly, but her words kept flowing. So when I hear Sophie ask for fairy tales, it makes me angry. Because I never had them. The air grew thick, like a weight pressing down on every chest in the room. I stared at her, my anger softening into sorrow. I whispered, "Oh, Olivia." She wiped her eyes quickly, as if ashamed of showing weakness. "You all think stories make kids strong? Maybe they do. But I survived without them. I studied, I worked hard, I built myself. I don't want Sophie to depend on stories. I want her to depend on herself." The twist hit me like cold water. It wasn't just dislike, it was pain, deep pain from a childhood robbed of love and comfort. Aunt Carol's face softened, Uncle Jim lowered his eyes. Even Michael shifted uncomfortably, finally breaking his silence. "Olivia," he whispered, "you never told me that." She shrugged, "Because it doesn't matter. It's the past." But her voice wavered, and I could see the little girl still living inside her. The little girl who never got tucked in, who never heard the words "once upon a time." I placed Sophie down and stood slowly. My knees stiff, but my voice steady. "Olivia, I said you didn't have stories. And maybe that's why you're strong in other ways. But Sophie deserves more than survival. She deserves joy, she deserves hope, she deserves the magic you never got." Olivia's lips parted, but no words came. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She turned away, ashamed of being seen. And in that moment, the truth was clear. She wasn't fighting me. She was fighting her past. The real enemy wasn't fairy tales. It was loneliness. The room was still after Olivia's confession. No one moved, no one spoke. I could feel the heaviness her words left behind. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt compassion, because behind all her sharpness was just a little girl still waiting for a bedtime story that never came. I looked at Sophie, her small hands clutching mine, her eyes searching my face. I smiled gently. "It's all right, sweetheart." That night, after the dishes were cleared and the family slowly left, I tucked Sophie into bed, her quilt soft, the smell of lavender lotion filling the room. "Grandma," she whispered, "can you still tell me a story?" Her question broke me and healed me all at once. I sat on the edge of her bed and began softly. "Once upon a time, there was a little girl who wanted to be brave." Her eyes grew wide, her little body relaxed as my words wrapped around her like a blanket. And for those minutes, the world outside faded, no tension, no arguments, just love. When I finished, Sophie whispered, "Thank you, Grandma. I love you." Her tiny arms wrapped around my neck, her warmth sinking deep into my tired bones. I kissed her forehead and stood quietly. In the hallway, Michael was waiting. His eyes glistened with tears he tried to hide. "Mom," he whispered, "I remember those nights when you used to sit by my bed even after a 16-hour shift. I remember the stories you told me." He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "They saved me more than I ever said." Tears filled my eyes. I touched his cheek gently. "That's why I can't stop," I whispered, "because I know what they gave you." Michael nodded slowly, like a weight was finally lifting. And then, to my surprise, Olivia appeared in the doorway. Her face tired, her eyes red, but her voice soft. "Maybe," she began, "maybe Sophie does need them." The words were quiet, but they cracked something open. Not victory, not defeat, but understanding. I nodded gently. No one is saying she doesn't need books or lessons or science, but she also needs wonder. She needs love wrapped in words. Olivia looked away, but she didn't argue. And sometimes that's the first step to peace. That night, I lay in bed, the Texas night, warm crickets humming outside. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Not because the fight was over, but because I remembered who I was. I wasn't just a widow, not just a burden, not just old-fashioned. I was Susan, 69 years old, a mother, a grandmother, a storyteller. And that no one could take from me. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house was quiet. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, dust floating in golden beams. I sat with a cup of coffee warm in my hands, the taste of peace after a storm. Michael walked in, his voice steady. "Mom, I need to say this." He pulled out a chair, sat across from me. "All my life, I've carried your stories with me. They made me strong. They made me human. And I won't let anyone take that away from Sophie." Tears filled my eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. For the first time, Michael stood tall, not just as a son, but as a father. Later that afternoon, Olivia returned from a walk, her face pale, her step slower. She looked at me, then at Michael, her voice hushed. "I was wrong." The words hung in the air, soft but heavy. I let my past turn into anger. I thought stories would make Sophie weak. But maybe her voice broke. Maybe it was me who was weak for not facing my own hurt. Michael reached for her hand, firm but gentle. "Olivia," he said, "Sophie deserves better. She deserves all of us working together." Olivia's eyes welled up. She nodded slowly, a crack of humility where once there was only pride. That night, when I tucked Sophie in, Olivia stood by the door. She didn't interrupt, she didn't roll her eyes. She listened. I told Sophie a story about a little bird who lost her mother but found the courage to sing anyway. Sophie drifted off to sleep, her breath, even her tiny hand wrapped around mine. When I turned, Olivia's eyes were wet. She whispered, "I never realized how beautiful it could be." I smiled softly. "It's never too late to start listening." She nodded, And for the first time, she didn't feel like an enemy, she felt like family. The days that followed were lighter. Michael called me Mom with warmth again. Sophie ran to me every afternoon asking for just one more story. And Olivia, though not perfect, tried to sit with us sometimes. The sharp edges of her voice softened little by little. It wasn't victory. It wasn't defeat. It was balance. Because the truth is no family is perfect, but love, even messy love, can heal. I realized something then. I had fought not just for fairy tales. I had fought for dignity, for memory, for the right to still matter. And I had won. Not through shouting, not through bitterness, but through love that refused to die. So I ask you, if your mother or your grandmother were standing in my shoes, would you silence her voice? Or would you let her words, her love, her stories shape the next generation? Because at the end of the day, it's not about princes and castles. It's about remembering that kindness and hope are never outdated. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself or someone you love in it, stay with me because I have many more stories that may feel like your own. Subscribe now so you and I can keep walking together through these memories.